Hello there, poetry lovers everywhere. My name is SARAH Jenkins. Welcome to another poetry deep dive today. I love Denis Martindale. He has written over 3,700 poems for the Poem Hunter website. This time, Denis Martindale has written a brand new Paradise Parable. The heavenly story is about a young man who went to heaven. In his travels, he arrived at a restroom where he found some people playing cards. Being a bit of a loner, he settled at a different table and played solitaire instead. Obviously, heaven was nothing like what he had expected it to be. The title of the parable is Time to Pack It In. Here is what the brand new parable's message shares with us today. So as we get into the source material for this explainer, we find out that when young Fred actually gets to heaven, it's pretty low-key. He isn't met by Jesus right away, no archangels, not even his family. He just decides to take a stroll down the streets of gold, walking past all these massive mansions and gorgeous buildings. But eventually, he gets a little tired. He spots a small building with a welcome sign and just wanders in. Now, you'd think he'd join the lively group of men and women playing cards right there in the room, right? But nope. His shy nature kicks right in. He finds an unopened deck of cards on a different table, shuffles them up, and just commits to playing solitaire. Totally on his lonesome. Okay, let's dive into this timeline, because it perfectly maps out just the sheer comedic scale of Fred's stubborn isolation. We start with his arrival and that quick tour of the golden streets we just talked about. But then, just look at the next milestone. 500 years later, half a millennium. For 5 entire centuries, Fred just stays in that exact same restroom, doing absolutely nothing but playing solitaire by himself. Literally. It takes a monumental intervention just to get him to join the group, and then, believe it or not, another full 1,000 years pass before he's finally ready for his true higher purpose. Martindale is using these massive, crazy blocks of time to humorously show us just how deeply ingrained our social anxieties can be, even when we literally find ourselves in paradise. To really get a feel for the dynamic in that room, just picture this comparison. On the one hand, we've got a lively, communal group of men and women having a great time playing cards together. They're chatting, they're engaged, they're sharing the experience. But then, on the other hand, visually and socially completely isolated, we've got young Fred. He deliberately chose a different table. He took an unopened deck of cards and completely shut himself off from all that surrounding joy. The source text actually points out that he hadn't spoken to the group and they hadn't spoken to him in all that time. It's a really stark contrast that hammers home his extreme social anxiety. I mean, the guy is quite literally stagnating in a corner while completely surrounded by the wonders of heaven. 500. Just let that number sink in for a second. It is absolutely ridiculous, but in the most brilliant comedic way, right? Fred sat there in total silence for 5 centuries playing a one-person card game. And that was just the status quo for everyone in that room. But then, one shocking day, the vibe completely shifts. The text tells us that Jesus walks in, and all of a sudden, the whole restroom is filled with this beautiful fragrance of roses. The group instantly knows it's him, not just an angel, but the Lord. Everyone bows, and Jesus just smiles and motions for them to carry on. But as you can imagine, it's pretty funny because now everyone is trying to play their cards with one eye on their hand and the other eye glued right on Jesus. Now, Jesus doesn't just march over and force Fred to change his ways. Instead, he gently guides him through this rather amusing, repetitive little process. Suddenly, a chair supernaturally appears right at Fred's lonely table. Fred gasps, his mouth just wide open in total shock. So, step 1, Jesus asks Fred a simple question. And Fred, who is clearly startled, just spits out a short, truthful answer. But Jesus isn't quite satisfied. Step 2, he asks the exact same question again. This time, Fred gives a slightly longer answer, maybe trying to explain himself a bit better, but nope, still not what Jesus is looking for. Finally, step 3, Jesus asks the question a 3rd time. And after this gentle, repetitive prodding, Fred finally catches on. Jesus wants him to join the others. So, what was that question? Jesus poses a really simple yet totally profound question. Wouldn't it be more interesting to join the others playing cards than to sit here all on your own? It's such a great line because it perfectly highlights the immense patience it took to break through Fred's 500-year-old shell of isolation. Right after asking this, Jesus actually points directly over to the group's table where another chair supernaturally appears, meant just for Fred. And the reaction in the room? Completely priceless. Fred just stares. The others stare. And when Jesus quietly disappears from the room, the whole group looks over at Fred, who is just staring right back at them, mouth wide open yet again. And this brilliantly illustrates the monumental moment of change. Fred is obviously not the quickest on the uptake, but he finally does it. He stands up for the very first time in 500 years and walks over to the communal table. And as soon as he sits down with the group, a little heavenly magic happens. All the old cards completely vanish, and a brand new, fresh deck of cards appears right in their place. As the author notes, this signifies a special deal, a very special deal indeed. It's just a beautiful metaphor for a fresh start, you know? Leaving behind centuries of self-imposed loneliness to finally join in the warmth of a community. So Fred officially joins the table, and once again, the centuries start flying by. 1,000 years pass! But listen, this millennium is entirely different from his first 500 years. During this time, young Fred learns a great deal about the others, and they learn all about him. He completely transforms from this quiet loner into an entertained, highly engaged friend. The text tells us he sees hundreds of card tricks and hears 1,000 jokes. He isn't isolating himself anymore. He is fully participating in the joy and fellowship of his peers. For the first time, he is finally comfortable. But eventually, even good things have to evolve. One day, Fred sighs, and his friends instantly sense that this is it. This is going to be the last day they play cards together. Something is, quite literally, playing on his mind. He realizes he is finally ready for more. So Fred stands up, warmly embraces each and every one of his friends, and says his goodbyes. He leaves the restroom and walks straight toward the tallest building in heaven, knowing deep down he needs to speak to Jesus. And to his absolute amazement, Jesus appears beside him immediately, telling Fred he doesn't even need to walk any further. It turns out this pilgrim's prayer had been expected for ages and ages. Jesus then puts his arm around Fred, and they are instantly transported right to the entrance of heaven. Jesus reveals a kind of sad truth. Some believers actually waste centuries in that restroom, achieving very little spiritual progress. So the crucial point is captured right here in this quote. Jesus says to him, "Your testimony could bless millions of believers once they hear how shy you were and just how much of a loner you were." Jesus explains that the restroom actually served a purpose. It gave Fred the exact amount of time he needed to gain confidence and change his heart. And now, that very struggle is his greatest asset. This leads right into Fred's true, humble calling. Jesus officially authorizes Fred to stand at the entrance of heaven to meet and greet all the new arrivals. Fred's job is basically to share his testimony, to tell these new folks how he spent hundreds of years isolating himself until he finally realized there had to be more to heaven than just playing cards. And Fred feels incredibly humbled to be trusted by the Lord with this task. Now as new believers appear, he embraces them and shares his story. By doing this, he successfully saves them hundreds of years of wasting their own time, allowing them to immediately go on and tour the wonderful wonders of heaven for themselves. So Fred is doing fantastic work, saving everyone's centuries of time. Well, almost everyone. Denis Martindale ends this parable with a fantastic, really lively punchline. Enter George, the fanatical chess player, who just so happens to arrive at the gates of heaven carrying his trusty old chess set. I mean, what are the chances of that, You can just picture George totally ready to march right past Fred, find a quiet little corner, and isolate himself over a chessboard for the next 1,000 years. It's such a wonderful, comedic reminder that human nature, all our little quirks and our stubborn habits, can be incredibly persistent, even in the afterlife. Which brings us to the final thought of this explainer. Are you waiting in the restroom of life, playing solitaire? Or are you ready to find your true purpose? Denis Martindale's parable of Fred is a super humorous look at heaven, sure, but it also holds a mirror right up to our daily lives here and now. Think about it. How often do we isolate ourselves, stubbornly sticking to our comfort zones, just wasting time when we could be engaging with our community and finding our true calling? Fred needed 1,500 years to figure it all out, but hopefully, this story inspires you to step out of your comfort zone a little bit sooner than that. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it leaves you eager to connect, engage, and discover your own special deal today.